Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss something which is actually quite challenging. I was posed a question. If I were advising Rishi Sunak on the subject of improving the Tories' chances for the general election, what would I advise? It's very difficult. At the start of Sunak's time as Prime Minister, I would have had plenty of advice. In fact, I discussed various things over the course of the last year, which I believe Sunak had the power to do. And I am realistic. I am conscious of the fact Sunak never had a good grip on the leadership of the Tory party. So it's not like he could just pursue which policies he thought best. He didn't have a completely free hand. It might well be that the party is largely ungovernable. But there were some things he did have the power to do. He had the power to isolate many of the rebels. He couldn't take them all on at once, of course not, but he could bit by bit. When some tried to undermine the Privileges Committee over their investigation into Boris Johnson, Sunak had already warned them against doing so and had every right to remove the whip when they ignored him. This was a very powerful stick to use against any Conservative MPs who want to retain their seats, but it's especially powerful when deployed against those on the far right who have ambitions of taking over after the election. For example, you can't take over after the election if you're not even a Conservative MP, and you won't be a Conservative MP if you're not a Conservative candidate, and that was within Rishi Sunak's power to determine. You know, Suella Braverman, Robert Jenrick, Liz Truss, Mark Francois, they've all given Sunak the excuse to remove the whip. By doing so, he would not just have dealt with the major threats to his party, but their followers would have fallen into line as well. After all, if they want to have any role in taking over the party after the election, they have to be around to do so. Sunak's chief problem is that he's going to be held responsible for the defeat of this election, which is fair enough. He will have been the leader and Prime Minister for 2 years at that point. That's enough time to have done something. But he should have at least said, well, if I'm going to take responsibility, then we're going to do things my way. Not that his way seems any more sensible than the half-arsed appeasement way he chose, but still. But all of that's in the past. He's failed to impose discipline. He focused on tax cuts when voters wanted him to focus on investment. He scrapped the only infrastructure project which the Tories had left. He's persisted with the Rwanda plan, even though, as I discussed yesterday, it's very obviously a tool that the far right are using in preparation for purging all moderate voices from the party very soon. But it's done now. If I were invited to Downing Street to advise Sunak on improving things at this point, and let's say I'd taken leave of my senses and decided I wanted to help him, I mean, what could I really advise? I mean, let's look at this in terms of the general advice you can offer to any government. As Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party, Rishi Sunak has the following powers. First, he can set the policy aims for the budgets. The Chancellor sets the budget itself, but a Prime Minister can stick their nose in if they want, and Sunak has done so. Second is to pass legislation, which can include secondary legislation where you tweak existing laws without bothering Parliament about the details. Third is to announce new policies for the next Parliament. In other words, prepare the manifesto for the election. And fourth would be public engagement, where you showcase the achievements of your government so far. So let's go over in reverse order. First, the record. After 14 years in power, Sunak really needs to be able to tell voters that they weren't just wasting their time voting Tory since 2010. This is difficult. Sunak can try to hail Brexit, but very few have noticed any benefit to themselves. You might persuade some people that the benefits are on their way, but not many that can actually feel them. Everything's more expensive. People are increasingly having to do without. The NHS is demonstrably in a worse position. So is transport, water, general cost of living. Hospitals and school buildings are falling down. There's no news on them being built back up again. There's a ridiculous backlog of both asylum and criminal cases in the system. You'd be hard-pressed to find a member of the public who thinks anything that the government runs is doing better than 2 years ago, never mind 14 years ago. So the best I could do is say, well, yeah, by all means, keep banging the Brexit drum. What else have you got? It's a pretty crap drum, but it's the only one you have. So then the promises for the future. Now, Sunak can, of course, paint a marvellous picture of the future. Oh, unicorns prancing around the sunlit uplands. Oh, it'd be wonderful. Unfortunately, he doesn't have the credibility to make it stick. Who would believe his promises? It's not just that the Conservatives have messed everything up over the last 14 years. Sunak doesn't have any personal triumphs. He hasn't brought NHS waiting lists down. He hasn't stopped the boats. He can go on about inflation, but not many believe that he had a hand in it. After all, if you believe the government actually brought inflation down, then why wouldn't you believe they're the ones who boosted it in the first place? The way he behaves, you'd think he imagines he's going to derive some benefit from the Rwanda plan. I'm not seeing it. In order to sell shiny promises, Sunak needed to be able to do what Boris Johnson did in 2019. Admit that his party has failed the public so far. There's no way of convincing the public otherwise. They know nothing works now. So you have to say, yeah, sorry, our party did let you down. But he has to claim he is different. He has the energy and focus to deliver positive changes. But Boris Johnson had been Prime Minister for like half a year and with a minority government. So he could reasonably claim, I haven't had the power to drive this change. I need a majority. Sunak will have been Prime Minister for 2 years. People will expect that he made something better. He's had the majority, quite a large majority. Actually, in 2 years, you would think people would expect to see noticeable improvements across a range of policy areas. Imagine 2 years into a Labour government and Keir Starmer having nothing to show for it. He'd be finished. The improvements may not be as rapid as someone like, but they will have to be there. And after 14 years of Tory failure, if Sunak cannot prove to the public that he is different, that he can fix something, then I don't think his promises will cut through. Then there's legislation. I mean, the Tories are passing various laws at the moment, but nothing that's really going to inspire the public. The best one they would have had was the Renters Reform Bill. Unfortunately, they've hollowed it out of everything that helps renters. In fact, the latest focus on legislation is actually about how the government are using building legislation to effectively ban trans people from having a piss anywhere when out in public. I mean, the only votes in that are the ones they've already got or the ones that Reform UK have, and they're not giving them up over trans issues. No, if you all want those votes back, you've actually got to stop the boats. And the other problem with legislation at this point is anything they pass won't really have a visible impact on people's lives until after the election anyway. So it's all about persuading people it will have an impact. But then you go back to that previous problem. He hasn't got a track record of delivery, so people won't believe it. Like the way a parliamentary cycle works is you load up your major legislation early on in the parliament. So Labour are planning on going straight out the gate with a load of big legislation when they win power, because that's the time for it to be done. So that by the time the next election comes around, it's noted, the impacts are actually being felt by the public. The end of the cycle is mostly about showing the impact of what you did early on. But the Tories didn't do anything. So that's knackered. All Sunak can do with legislation, as I say, is try and persuade the public how it will improve their lives in a few years' time. But why would they believe him? He's had 2 years already, or he will have done by the time autumn rolls around, and he's done nothing with those 2 years. So legislation isn't really a way to win votes back either, which just leaves tax and spend, the budget. Whether it be tax cuts or investment in strategic areas, you can absolutely win voters over with a budget which is focused on their needs. Unfortunately, there have been 2 budgets produced now with Sunak as Prime Minister and another couple with him as Chancellor, and they haven't exactly inspired voters. The tax cuts this year fell flat and he has no more budgets left. There can be a mini budget this September or October, right? But that won't change anything. It'll just be another promise for the future. The mini budget is all about this is what we're going to do next year. They won't be around next year. The final budget of this Parliament has already been delivered. There is no evidence that any significant group of target voters were happy with it. At which point, there's nothing left. The madness of delaying the election further is that the Tories are committing themselves to an election in autumn or maybe even winter, a time of year when people have a more naturally pessimistic outlook. There's a reason why all but one of the elections in my lifetime have been in spring. People are more cheerful. Autumn or winter, mad time to go to the polls, unless you've got some aces up your sleeve. But no, Sunak has nothing. There's absolutely nothing he can do at this point to regain the initiative. He is resorting to hoping for a miracle, and you don't need advisors for those. The only advice I think I could offer is that of the Steve Martin character in the 200th episode of The Simpsons. You're all screwed. Goodbye. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe for further content and click the like button. You can also sign up for memberships if you'd like to support the channel further. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.